The process of privatization, what has happened, how do we remedy it? If we can, why not? Well, Ken Okolugbo joins us now. He's a public affairs analyst. Thank you for coming this morning, Ken.
Thank you very much, Chamberlain.
It was interesting. Some amazing scenarios have just played out and really unbelievable.
Yes.
For want of words to use now. But you also listening to the entire process and procedure. I mean, someone just sent a tweet saying, listen, the youths are watching with frustration, quoting Harry Potter, saying, listen, the man who must not be named, he thought Harry Potter was just fiction. But now it's happening in our life and time.
Yeah, but the truth about it is, it's sad. It's really sad because a situation where you have three of the past DGs of BP making direct accusation at their immediate bosses as at that time clearly shows that there's an erosion of confidence, eroded confidence in the privatization process. And really and truly, if you go back to the history of why we decided to privatize most of those public companies, it was basically, if I remember, it was in 1973 when they did the indigenization decree that they decided that most of these international private companies should be turned into state companies. Then we had the oil boom. And by the 80s, when the oil boom had stopped, there was no money again to fund these companies. And if you go to the history, look at, for example, like you rightly said, Alaja, the DSC, Delta Steel Company, it's worth 225 billion, but that is on paper. Apparently, most of the contracts that were used in building Alaja were inflated. It is not the real value. The parameters that were used were not the real values of that steel company. And it was sold to what's the name of the company again? The JNL company for how much? For about 4 billion naira.
I mean, we had someone here who was from the Daily Times. He spoke about what he could. But Delta Steel Company, for instance, I mean, what could a state have done? Do they have any choice? Were they supposed to have spoken up, or was it beyond
Well, the
them?
truth is that we had people who managed it. They should have been able to speak up. That is exactly what we were trying to say. Because it is sad that we're waiting for this probe. I mean, it's like medicine after death. Because why I don't even sympathize, especially, let me use Al-Rufai as an example. Why I don't sympathize with them is, you were sitting down in that office. For example, he said when Julius Bala was appointed, he kicked against it. But he became Minister of FCT. He knew very well that these things were not going to go right. Julius Bala himself said at the time he was leaving the BPE, he was forced to go into the Ajokuta agreement, where we are paying 300 million naira of taxpayers' money every month without anything being done. And even the minister comes to say, all we need is 650 million naira to be able to start producing. I mean, it is a colossal waste of the taxpayers'
The fact that
funds.
he said he was
and it's very sad.
Forced to do certain things.
Yes.
I mean, how tenable is that? Given some of the
it's medicine after death. I think he should even be more culpable because it's accessory after the fact. Because he knew very well that these things he was being forced to do was totally wrong. Why didn't he cry out at that time? Why did he wait for a probe panel? Why did he wait for Al-Rufai to indict him? Do you understand where I'm coming from here? Why should he have waited for this long to come out to say, this is what I saw, this is what I think was going to go wrong? And you can't believe it, they stripped Ajokuta, because when they were saying then that they were stripping them of the machineries that were in Ajokuta, selling them and even exporting, it was alleged that some of them were exported. Okay, look at Delta, for example. They said Ajokuta, the Bua group wanted to go for $20 million, which is about 3 billion naira. And the
$25 million.
No, 20. They said 20. That was the first bid. Then they said 25 million as a preferred bidder. Then eventually they said they were going to go for $30 million, which is what they sold it for. On paper, was it sold? It wasn't sold. Okay, look at Alscon. It's sad enough to know that Alscon was sold for $250 million. And $120 million was kept for you to dredge the Imo River so that gas can be passed. And that $120 million for 6 years has not been used. Nobody is asking it.
Well, Mr. Okolugbo, if we leave all of these, the aluminium smelting company of Nigeria, leave the DSC and leave the Ajokuta and others, now we're talking about the amount with which these infrastructures and establishments were sold. Now we'll now look at the process now. Let's look at the process now. remember, they did say some of these companies that never submitted bid actually won them. So away from the monies, now we're looking at the process proper now. How does it work in our climb or in other places? A place where you never submitted bid, and you finally, from nowhere, someone calls you up in your house and say you have qualified for something you never indicated your interest.
That is definitely not right. Because when you talk about the preferred bidder, we've seen situations whereby those who submitted bid eventually win the bid and they can't come up with the money. Remember Nitel? It happened a couple of times. Even Pentascope. Do you understand? So it is not always right to say everybody that submits bid will have the capability to come up with the reserved price. Maybe after you win your bid, there are certain parameters you might use. And as at the time you are bidding, you are thinking that I would get this X amount of money. And by the time I win the bid, I can't come out with it. And it can be forgiven if, as at that material point in time, you don't have that funds, and then you go for someone who did not bid. But a situation whereby someone who did bid, like Boa said, I'll use that example, and they said at the hearing, or those who allege that Nikon was sold for 1 billion naira, when it is in fact collected a loan of 46 billion naira now with the assets that is on ground, and people are there ready to pay more than that, then it becomes very worrisome. Because it therefore means that it was done on political expediency, which is exactly why we should condemn it in all ramifications. And if the investigations are carried to a point of physical examination of these companies, then we should reverse.
So the finger points somewhat to the political class. So
well, that is exactly the allegation, that most of these were done on political expediency.
From the submissions,
and the fact, the submissions we have had, and the fact that they were done on basis of knowing me,
and if that is true,
it's really sad.
It sounds very much like a song. Yes. Me knowing you, Abba. But anyway, trying to know them, trying to know them proper. You understand,
yes,
Mr. Okolugbo.
Yes.
How can this particular administration score a big political point in all of this probe, knowing full well that that privatization is under the office of the vice president?
Well, if you remember, to be fair to the vice president, he was the first person that actually blew the whistle. He said 80%. He was very emphatic.
With some people,
80% of the companies that have been privatized have gone moribund. And that's about 122.
Well, it's a figure that some people have.
So if the vice president blew the whistle, it therefore shows you that, look, he was something he couldn't stomach anymore.
In other words,
yes,
what should he be doing now?
What he should be doing now is to be very firm, decisive, without being sentimental. Anybody that is found wanting in this privatization, in fact, anybody that is found wanting in what has happened before now, and companies which were shortchanged. I'll give an example. Folio has been accused of collecting 750 million naira from Afribank with the assets of Daily Times of Nigeria. Daily Times was our flagship in those days. And today, Daily Times, nobody knows. I mean, they run a skeletal online service. And they said they did not pay a kobo. You can imagine. So the vice president should not even think twice about, first and foremost, bringing them to book, discontinuing with research processes, and carrying out a re-evaluation of most of those companies.
They say that when a snake bites,
yes,
sometimes you also make the antidote from the snake's poison, as in from its...
That's true.
Yeah, so all of this happened. I mean, I'm going to get political now. All of this happened under the watch of the PDP, whether or not we like
well,
it.
If you say the PDP, it is also the PDP.
And it's also the PDP that's trying to reconstruct this.
That's exactly where I'm coming from.
So do you think that the party has the political will to be able to push this through?
Well, if the party doesn't have the political will to push this through, first and foremost, we'll never have had this pro panel.
No, but we've seen it before.
But don't forget that the PDP has a majority in the Senate.
So they can.
But what we are saying here now, what we are saying is that they can't kill this one. Not even for those of us that are members of PDP. We'll cry out. Because it's very sad. If we continue like this, do you understand where I'm coming from here?
Sorry, let me button here.
They can't kill this one.
Did anyone cry out when it was time for the power probe? Till this moment, no one has seen
$16 billion.
Yeah, no one has seen anything about it.
Well, you see what happened to the Ndudi Elumelu committee. It got enmeshed in also crisis of allegations of being corrupt. If you remember very well. So we have to look at it holistically. These were people that the hunter became the hunted. That was exactly what happened to that committee. So it was difficult for any Nigerian to now ascribe any positive sign or anything positive to that committee, when in fact that same committee had been alleged to have collected money. Investigations were carried out, but it became a bit murky and a bit you understand where I'm coming from here. So it was difficult for that Elumelu-led committee to go on and implement holistically the things they have found out, because they had accused them of corruption, unfortunately.